Well, I'm really excited to be here. The first thing I have to do is explain why I brought a prop. This is our friend Lovey. My 4-year-old daughter has been sad. I've been on the road a lot lately, and she has asked me to bring Lovey and take pictures of Lovey on the road. So Lovey was with me covering State of the Union. Lovey will come with me to Nebraska later today, where I'll do my next story, and Lovey will be able to join all of you here today. And Lovey also helps me illustrate a point that I think sometimes gets forgotten, and that lay leaders at the church often have some pretty busy lives outside of church. But we want to make sure that they are able to bring those skills to church and that they feel inspired to do so in this world that is continuing to put increasing pressures on our time, whether that's with family, work, or elsewhere. How do we inspire people to still give their gifts to church, where, as we've really illustrated through this conference, it's so important to have lay participation. And I can't think of a panel that helps me illustrate that better than this panel right here. I'm gonna have everyone do a short introduction, just as you would if you have a new parishioner coming to your church and wants to know who you are. So I'll start with you, Kelly.
Great, thank you, Julia. I'm Kelly Martin. I'm a parishioner at Epiphany Parish in Seattle. And over the years, being a member there, I've been involved in several different ministries. The most recent one is being a member of the vestry. I did that for the last 3 years, and I'm just now starting my post-vestry life. The last 2 years, 2 consecutive years, I served as senior warden. I'm also a lay preacher and am a part of our sermon review team, and also serving as a Eucharistic minister, and also part of the pastoral care team. This is my second EPN conference, and it's a thrill to be here.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lynette Diley, and I'm a parishioner at Christ Church Cathedral here. So thank you for many of you who were able to join us at services last night at the cathedral. It was wonderful to have you there, and that was just an extraordinarily moving service, I think, for all of us. So thank you for that. I've had the opportunity to serve both at the diocesan level, chairing the standing committee, and then at the cathedral. I've served on the vestry as senior warden. I've chaired the endowment board, and most recently I served as chair of the search committee that brought our new dean, whom you all met last night, Nat Katz.
My name is Greg Zafiro. I'm the warden of St. Thomas Church, 5th Avenue in Manhattan, New York. It's nice to see so many familiar faces. Thank you for inviting us. As far as my involvement in the church, I'm not only the warden, but I'm chair of the audit committee, member of the investment committee. I serve as a high altar acolyte and elector, and I'd say I've been a parishioner for now almost 14 years, and it's been one of the most gratifying experiences that I think I've ever had.
Wow. And Richard.
I'm Richard Ammons. I'm a member of St. Philip's in downtown Durham. I have been a member of the vestry, senior warden, and a member of the finance committee. I also serve as a Eucharistic minister and an usher. I also happen to be on the board of EPN, Episcopal Parish Network, and I'm the lay trustee at the University of the South for the Diocese of North Carolina.
Well, thank you. It's a thrill to be up here with all of you. Lynette, I wanted to start with you asking you about your experience on the standing committee of your diocese and what you learned there that might help you reimagine, or sort of led you to reimagine, the role of your church.
Good. And this is a little bit of a convoluted story, so kind of bear with me with that. When I was elected to the standing committee, I had never done anything at a diocesan level before. And I knew the contours of our diocese, but I didn't know it well at the beginning. And I was really struck as we began the work in terms of how varied we are within this territory. I mean, it's a number of counties to begin with, but they vary significantly by almost any demographic. We have one county that has less than 5,000 people in the entire county, and you're sitting right now in Harris County with Houston, so you can imagine those differences. And it carries across the board in terms of income levels, the variety of ethnicity that are represented within the diocese. It's a really broad mix within this multi-county territory. And that was very helpful, not only obviously in the work of the standing committee to have a better sense of that, but I had the opportunity after that to chair our Episcopal health system. And it was headquartered here in Houston. We had suburban hospitals spread throughout the broader metroplex area here within Houston. And so the understanding of those differences, I think, helped immensely within that role. But even more importantly, as we began to look at that hospital system, we realized that we needed to, the hospital system had been in place for almost 70 years, that we needed to refresh the hospitals themselves. The buildings, the main campus was becoming more antiquated. And we looked strategically in terms of what it was going to take in terms of financial resources to do that, and realized while we were very large, we might not be producing quite enough revenue to do what was going to be necessary for that. We may need a partner. But more importantly, we realized that the mission had changed. And that was that in the time that the hospital system was built, it was built because there was a lack of acute care in the city. We didn't have enough hospital beds. We had, at this point, plenty of hospital beds in Houston, but the underserved community was significant, and they weren't getting reached by the hospital system. They weren't getting adequate medical care. We ultimately decided to sell that hospital system, and understanding, again, kind of the broad reach within the diocese, we knew what that might mean to various people who were accustomed to coming to St. Luke's. But we ended up selling it, and then we created a health foundation from that. We were able to sell it for a little over $1.2 billion, so that gave us significant resources. And when we developed that health foundation, and I moved to chair that, we decided to focus really strategically on what we were doing and not just writing checks to what may be great causes, but weren't going to change the world strategically in terms of health. But having that broad perspective from the diocese of what those needs were, that the health needs in a rural county were very different than in urban, and we were trying to do things with that money that affected the entire diocese, not just Houston, Texas, where we were headquartered. So the thread through all that made a huge difference, I think, in terms of what we've been able to accomplish.
So, Richard, I want to go to you next because I think Lynette's point exemplifies something that you've learned, which we've talked about a lot here this week. I know is that the church that was might not be the church that is.
That's right.
And could you tell us about your experience leading your church through a transition, some of the difficulties you might have encountered and things you learned along the way?
Sure. In the fall of 2019, we learned that we were the recipients of an extraordinarily generous bequest from one of a beloved parishioner. We received $7 million in unrestricted gift, as well as 50 acres located about 10 miles from downtown next to a state park. And so this challenged us and led us to think about what did this mean for our parish. Our endowment went from $3 million to a little over $11 million. And the question was, do we keep it? Do we give it away? What are we called to do in terms of ministering to our community? We're at downtown. We pride ourselves on being a downtown parish. We also pride ourselves in thinking seriously about creation care. What do we do with this piece of property? Do we keep it or do we give it away? How do we become a different St. Luke's given this significant set of resources, both in terms of financial resources and physical resources? And is God calling us to be something more than we had been before? So again, there's a old St. Philip's or a new St. Philip's that we have to think about.
And that also brings up, I think, a lot of what churches have been through just in the past few years, because this was this around COVID or before that?
So we got this gift in the late fall of 2019. In March, I joined the vestry in January of 2020, was asked to be senior warden a month before everything closed down, 3 months before our rector left, 5 months before our associate rector left. So if this was a time where laity had to step up, we certainly learned that because we had to make decisions about how we were going to manage these resources. How are we going to hold church when people can't come physically to our building? And there are a number of other projects that were going on. The campus planning study, thoughts about improving our garden close. And now we had to look for new clerical leadership, clergy leadership. So our folks in the pew had to really step up, and we had to take into account who do we have in the parish, what are their skills, how might we harness those skills in order to continue moving forward.
That's, I think, something a lot of us have learned, especially during these COVID eras. I joined the vestry at Christ Church Georgetown the exact same time you were joining your vestry as well. And our priest, as many of you may know, was patient zero for COVID in Washington, D.C. He was on the news. We felt so terrible for him, but it meant our church, our lay leaders really had to come together because he was hospitalized for 3 weeks. Our vestry had calls every single day. And then towards the end of that time, and the COVID period, we were trying to launch a capital campaign to get people to give money to a building they haven't even seen in years. So it can be incredibly difficult, but I think also really paved the way for more opportunities. And Kelly, that's what I wanted to turn to you about, both in terms of how, what COVID did, not just for your church, but also for you and the ways that you were able to step up.
I love that question. It's interesting, I think the most significant impact that the pandemic had on Epiphany Parish is we realized how much we missed just physically being around one another. And I know that we're not the only church that endured that longing, and it really was, I think we can all say in this room, a longing. We missed being able to shake one another's hand during the peace. We missed being able to have that chatter at after service, in the Great Hall. So it's interesting. I think we just really leaned into how palpable we missed that incarnational relationship. We realized, we always knew how strong, of course, incarnational relationship is. It's the heart of being a Christian. It's definitely the heart of how we worship at Epiphany. But we missed it so much, and we tried to find new ways to bring that relationship to life. Our rector, the Reverend Doyd Kahn, is just a phenomenal leader at Epiphany. And it's interesting, he was so determined during COVID to make sure that the church stayed running in whatever ways that it could, of course, in compliance with the governor's requirements. And lay leadership really stepped up into that determination and into that call. So it's interesting, and actually kind of fascinating. So we're in the Diocese of Olympia. And our diocese has a strong history already of lay leadership. So back in the 1850s, when we only had the second bishop, there were only 2 priests for this really large geographic area, and there were 4 congregations. So those 2 priests had to, of course, cover those 4 churches. And so at that time, the existence of the church really was supported in our diocese by lay leadership. So we have that strong history of robust lay leadership at the diocese level, and Epiphany fits right into that. We're really grateful to have had a strong, robust lay leadership at Epiphany pre-COVID, of course, during the pandemic and after. There's a few ways where that was brought to life during the pandemic. So one, I think we saw how creative church could be. And in that way, so everything at Epiphany moved to video. And at the time, our director of communications, Jad, would use his iPhone to record services and to record sermons. And then what a parishioner saw is that, and we were so grateful to get this gift from this parishioner, was he volunteered to fund a really terrific audio-visual system. So that, I think that showed us a few different things about leadership, that one, lay leadership doesn't have to be front of center. It can be, behind the scenes like that, and it can meet an immediate need. And we still use that significant audio-visual system to this day. And we got really creative in how we and how we showed up in relationship. A lot of parishioners came together to record chapters of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And then that was pushed out in an email to the entire congregation. And it was like this kind of audio, it's almost like an audio book club that we all participated in. And families could gather around their computers and hear this book being read. So we really leaned into creativity during COVID, and we saw how creative we could be. Another way that the pandemic kind of shifted how we saw leadership is how we worked in partnership with clergy. So, for example, during the pandemic, we started Evensong. That was recorded. We also started evening prayer, and that was an opportunity for me and for others, but to step into preaching. I had never preached before. I was nervous to preach, but it was just a chance to get to know the Bible and the gospel a lot better, and to do things we'd never done before, and take chances, and to preside at Evensong. Evensong now, it's really interesting. During COVID, Evensong, which we recorded in our church, just had 3 people. So you had the organist, the presider, and the cantor. And now it's just this beautiful, like, robust service that we have every Sunday, 5:30 Pacific time. And it's a much larger choir, but it's an entry point for new people to come to our church. And most of the presiders are still lay people. I'm grateful to be one of them. And several other lay people are Evensong presiders as well. So that's given people a chance who might not have presided before to be able to do so, and to do it in partnership with the staff and with the choir. Another way that the pandemic kind of changed the way Epiphany does church and the way we are leaders is, I think we missed, of course, being with one another so much that when we were able to regather, we became more of a community hub and a little more external facing. So now there's a Christmas tree lighting that happens on our campus, our women's retreat group, which was strong before, but now it's just, people just love being together. It's like 40, 50 women who gather together every single month. Some of them are members of Epiphany. Some of them are not, but they come they come specifically for our women's retreat group. There's an intergenerational dance party that we have every month, and when you walk up the stairs into the Great Hall, you can hear the revelry before you see it. But it's really terrific because you have grandparents and parents and children all coming together for this awesome dance party. And again, some of them are members of Epiphany, and some of them are new to the parish, and some are not members. So we've become a little more of this community hub. And that's been really important too, seeing this new, exciting way that we can regather with a bit more of an external focus. And then the last area is around sermons. Lay leaders have been a really strong part of our sermon creation process. That includes our director of worship, who's a lay person, director of communications, and who's lay, and then also people like me and a few others who are lay preachers. During the pandemic, before the pandemic, lay preachers would preach occasionally, and it was usually around one event, like perhaps our annual appeal. But during the pandemic, also when we saw some staff changes, we saw that lay leaders really were able to help out clergy and help out the church by doing their lay preaching. And now we're much more intentional about that, where lay preachers actually preach on Sundays, and they're a part of the institution. So those are a lot of ways that we have seen lay leaders step up with creativity, taking some chances, realizing how well in partnership we want to work with clergy. And I think we learned too is how much that's not just about participating in community, but that participation has now turned into a lifeline, and we continue that post-pandemic.
That's great. Well, if I'm ever in Seattle, I want to come to a dance party. That's really fun. Greg, we've talked a lot about the ways churches are changing, but you are in this unique position at St. Thomas with the boys' choir, really holding on to a tradition and in a world that's really stripping away some of these traditions. Can you talk about how you've been able, first of all, what makes it so unique? I'd love to hear you describe it. And then, how you've been able to hold on to that model and keep it going effectively unchanged, and then some of the challenges that you're facing with that.
Right. The question is really very specific and endogenous to St. Thomas Church, but it really affects the way that we all struggle with many challenges, sort of where we are today. The first is with respect to running a residential choir boarding school that is same-sex for boys, 3rd grade to 8th grade. We are the only one left in North America, and there's only 3 left, including us, in the world.
Wow.
So to give you an idea that are we hanging on? We are hanging on. We've been doing this for 100 years, but it used to be the model. So the first is to say we have been blessed with resources that has enabled us for 100 years to offer this to the core of our mission in liturgical excellence and music, just in the Anglican Worldwide Communion. So that's number one, is we very much treasure what we do. But that's not without challenges. And sort of Richard and I were speaking a few minutes ago that St. Thomas is a wealthy parish. We are well endowed. Our forebears gave us a significant amount of money that we have today. But the problems are just magnified. The same challenges that small parishes have, large parishes have as well. It's just there's more zeros attached to it. There's more people involved. There's more cooks in the kitchen. And you feel like the decisions are somewhat weightier, but they're really not. And sort of the struggle that we face, that many of you face as lay leaders, is to say, is this relevant in our community today? Will this be relevant tomorrow? And so I use this expression in vestry meetings. I say, would you draw the pie chart in which we allocate our time and treasure today anew, exactly the way we have it? And the answer is almost always no. Right, so here's all the money we have, here's all the time and the talent and the treasure that we have from all these people. Is this exactly how you would draw it? It then opens up this thought exercise of sort of challenging yourselves to, in essence, moving those pie pieces to validate and reinforce what the people of today need. I mean, the church is for the living while honoring this tradition. So we very much struggle with that balance, but at the same time, we've threaded this needle for so long that it's really become a core part of our identity. So then the next step you have to ask yourself is, as lay leaders, how can you make that impact? And I think really what has come to the fore for me is why we do it is it really enforces this covenant that we have, really this covenant between God that we can make a difference. And you have to believe that in order to step into this seat. I can't even imagine what you went through. I can't even believe you stayed in that seat for all of that upheaval and challenge and turmoil. But now here you're on this panel to explain, obviously, what you learned from it. I feel very similar at St. Thomas when looking at an institutional treasure like the St. Thomas Choir of Men and Boys. You're all listening to that on the audio a few moments ago. And actually, I didn't even realize that was them. And I said, well, this is great. Joe said, oh, it's the St. Thomas. I said, oh, well, of course. Thank God you didn't say King's College. I would have walked out. But just finishing that thought about lay leadership is you really have to believe that what you're doing is making a difference. And the third thing is really impact. We talk about the impact you had just in a short period of time. And the reality of the situation is our institutions will far out survive us, right? So there's a short-term impact and focus you want to have as lay leaders, but the second hat that we often wear is to say, often to sacrifice what we want today in order to preserve what we'll have in the future. There were a lot of conversations on the previous panel, and you can read through the threads of this is sort of the parade of horribles for the Episcopal Church today, particularly in America, and I'm sort of sick of hearing about that. It is a reality we have to face, but I think there's a way to discern between spending and investment. And I think if we look at the latter, you get to the heart of what I'm trying to get at with St. Thomas is how can we use our resources so that it is an investment in the future, even if it's not identical to what we have today. Because when we look back and we're no longer up here, can you honestly answer the question of did you make the right decision? And so those are a couple of the ways that we think about things, or I even personally try and attack them, given the question you asked.
Yeah, wow, well, that's so well said. One of the things that's been so exciting about being able to get to know all of you is just to know everything you do outside of church, too. And I wanted to get to that starting with Lynette. You sat at the helm of a major financial institution. You've also been an ambassador for the U.S. And you've also done so much for your church. How are you able to bring your skills from outside of church into your life as a lay leader? And what advice do you give for other people who think, I'm so busy and I'm trying to expand my career and trying to take off in other parts of my life that I don't have time for my church?
Well, I think we ultimately find time to do the things that we're interested in doing. So, and I don't say that casually, because I mean, we clearly, between business responsibilities, family responsibilities, et cetera, it's not always easy, but I really have always felt, at least personally, the things that matter to you, you somehow do. You may have to take a reduced role at some point in time, but you do still have the ability to participate. I think if I look, though, in terms of the things I've had the opportunity to do professionally, one of the key things I really learned from that was the importance of being a good listener. And it doesn't take away from what you need to do as a leader in an organization, but to lead, you really have to understand where you are, and you do that by listening to those around you. And I think that that reminder was particularly helpful for me more recently when I chaired the search committee at the cathedral. We had a good pattern of previous searches that had been done extraordinarily well, so that was helpful to begin with. But one of the things we did early on was surveying the parish, both what they wanted as a parish, what they thought the parish stood for, and then secondly, what they were looking for in qualities of a dean. And the search committee, I can assure you, took that very seriously. We listened to those discussions of the survey within the congregation and took some good pointers from that process. We also really benefited from the vestry, because the vestry wrote the parish profile for us, which was a great gift. But they were kind enough as they were writing it to share that with us as we began our work, to ask for any comments that we had. And certainly the section in terms of qualities of a new dean, because we knew that was going to be critical to our work, was very important. So we did some changes within that, and they were kind enough to listen. So listening's a two-way street. And I think that experience was a good example of that for me. We were listening to the congregation, in turn the vestry listened to us in terms of the feedback. So I think the document we put together was a good description of our parish and what we were looking for in terms of leadership. Within the search committee itself, though, I think we all modeled listening to one another. It was a good representative group, and it was composed of, as you might expect in a group of, this was 14 people, both introverts and extroverts, so some people are more likely to speak than others, but people were good at drawing one another out and listening to and very respectful of what they had to say, and I think that was critical to our work in that process too. And then, of course, it was listening to the people that we were talking to around the U.S., what they had to say. I mean, it was interesting for me, as I looked at the number of people coming here, how many of you, I feel like I know your parishes, because I've heard more sermons in the last 2 years. Thank goodness everybody is pretty much on Zoom. So and the good news is we have a lot of good preachers in the Episcopal Church, and my life has been blessed by that experience. But I feel like I know people who don't have a clue that I know them from having had that experience, and I actually met a couple yesterday, so that was kind of fun in the process too. But listening to people so that by the end of the day, as we came to our deliberations, I felt we came together as a group, and the Holy Spirit listened to us too, because it was an extraordinarily moving experience, that final session. And the group likes to tell the story because it's quite true. As we were meeting, it was a typical thunderstorm Houston afternoon, and the lights went out in the tower in which we were meeting. And we continued our discussion. I mean, there was a little daylight coming through the windows, so we could still see one another. And the group finished, and just as I started to give my concluding comments, the lights all came back on. So they thought that was a perfect ending to the session. But I don't underestimate, I think, in anything we do, particularly in a group setting, to listen to one another. And then, as I mentioned in our conclusion, listening to the Holy Spirit and what direction we feel like we're getting to in that process.
That's beautiful. And I certainly felt that last night in the worship service.
No.
Thanks to your good work.
No, it was extraordinarily
It was.
moving.
And the message I think I was left with at the end, the part about, opening up, this is just in the charge and benediction at the end, but just opening ourselves up to God's grace and mercy and opening ourselves up to change. That's just such a beautiful image that I hope we can all leave here with as well. And Kelly, I wanted to turn to you again because you were so humble in your last answer that you did mention that you've been one of the people who've been doing the sermons at your church, and you've been able to draw upon your experience as a book editor and to write these sermons. And I wanted to know, what that taught you, also in terms of bringing your professional life into church, but what kind of challenges and struggles were you up against as you had to turn your skills in a different direction in a way that was so spiritual, is so different from editing a book?
So my whole career it has been as a book editor, and I've mostly edited fiction. So to be able to edit sermons, which was my first time kind of doing nonfiction, my first time working with texts that were spiritual, that were focused on Jesus. And one of the kind of pretty wonderful things about our church is our rector, Dwight, is able to, it's matchmaking. Like he's able to matchmake a parishioner and whatever their God-given skills are with a particular ministry or a particular need in our church. It's a really, really wonderful gift. He's able to do that. The staff is able to do that. So I was asked, so we have what's called a sermon review, and we meet every single Tuesday, and it's maybe 7 or 8 or so people on this sermon review team. And it includes clergy, it includes the lay preachers, our director of communications, also our director of worship, and also a parishioner. So there's a different parishioner that joins sermon review every single week. And what we do is we review the previous, whoever preached the previous Sunday, and then we look forward 2 weeks ahead and we hear what that preacher is thinking about when it comes to his or her sermon, and we give ideas. It's so incredible to get the parishioner, and again, it's a different parishioner every single week, but to get the parishioner's feedback, what did they think worked really well with the previous sermon? Were there some challenges to it? People are honest, and we give constructive feedback. We give a lot of compliments. You have to make sure it's the good mixed with ways we can improve. But one thing I loved was I was able to edit some clergy sermons as sermon editor, and also the lay preachers, their sermons as well. And I think one of the beautiful things was it married, first of all, I was so honored and grateful to be asked to do that and to join the team, but it just married my love of books with my love of Jesus and just fueled it in this magnificent way, like a way I hadn't even dreamed of. So that just goes to show the way a leader, clergy can see something in a parishioner, and vice versa. And also, one of the challenges was the way I would edit a sermon is a little similar to the way I would edit a book. You want to make sure the storytelling is intact, that there's a strong ending. But every once in a while, some of the edits would make the sermon a little too bookish, and our Jad, our director of communications, would remind me, so Kelly, a book, yes, is meant to be read, and there's going to be some overlap between editing a book and editing a sermon, but a book is meant to be read, and a sermon is meant to be heard. So you have to and there are differences. Some things are similar, but there are differences in there. And so what I loved about that feedback was I was able to take what I think is one of the gifts God has given me, and to learn and to let that calling continue to evolve. Like, it's not just the leader bringing his or her expertise, but you're letting your call be shaped and evolved as you continue to use it and continue to work with people who help you kind of harness it. And then the last thing is, I remember one of the first times I preached, I was so nervous because I did not go to seminary. I didn't know the Bible inside and out, though I was taking Bible study and I took EFM. But I was nervous. I thought it had to be this incredibly academic, deep, theological sermon. And what I learned from the sermon review and from our rector and from our director of communications is that the very thing that you might think is a weakness, the fact that I did not go to seminary, can actually be your strength. So the sermons I was able to bring, I think, an accessibility. I entered the sermons from a very emotional place and kind of talk about a journey through the gospel. It relied on storytelling, emotion, and also the setting. I was able to describe setting well, and I'm just very grateful to the team for giving that feedback. But those were some of the challenges and some of the beauty that came out of it.
Incredible. Also, that so many people want to be part of that process.
Yes.
That so many
Yeah.
people bring them in. One thing I have found at Christ Church is we're really trying to figure out how to nourish lay leaders, particularly people in my demographic, people 20s, 30s, and 40s, whether they be young professionals or starting families. It's a demographic that I know churches really want to grow, but it's also one where people think really differently about church and how much time they can give to it. We have actually have a wonderful problem right now at Christ Church is that we've run out of space for Sunday school because we have so many new young families being baptized. It's been wonderful, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing our capital campaign. One of the things that we've done, and then I want to have Greg also chime in on the nourishment aspect as well, but one of the things that we figured out was that parents wanted to still get spiritual nourishment. Even if you have a young child, it doesn't mean giving up your time on Sunday. So it was really great to have nursery, Sunday school. For us, at least, it made sense for that to be at the same time. But that was a huge change because for decades, children sat in the pew with their parents, and then Sunday school was after church. But we found that if we wanted people to come, we had to figure out how to meet them where they are. And so, Greg, I wondered if you could ask, because I know with just such a heavy lift at a church, with the institution you have, just, what do lay leaders need to be? How can you nourish lay leaders as they continue to do this work, to continue to bring them in?
So it's a great question, and I will tell you there are things that I've heard now a couple of times where the concept of leadership it's just so wonderful, and it's happy, and it's irreverent, and there's children and families, but then there's another side of this, and you have to delve deep into the nourishment question, and you almost have to lie to yourself when things don't go well to stay in it. And I'll tell you, I just speaking from experience, the one time in all the years that I've been involved at St. Thomas where I really went home and had a good cry and said, do I want to do this anymore, was around safeguarding. And we have had instances in the past of credible allegations of sexual abuse of children. And I'm telling this audience that, and it's not all, where do you find the nourishment to go back and say, I want to be involved with the solution and drawing up policies and procedures? And that's the part of leadership that's really hard. It is so amazing when I go and see the Noble Singers, which is a newly formed choir within St. Thomas germinating, and parents bringing their children. This is all, or the images a moment ago that were on the screen. That's incredibly helpful as leaders to want to be a part of that community. But then at the same time, I really have to say, from a mentality perspective is, I get involved because I almost lie and say, well, if no one else is going to do this, I have to do it. And I know that's not true. Plenty of very capable people work alongside all of us in leadership, but part of this is being lay leaders is really dealing with some very heavy, heavy issues. And the nourishment comes from a spiritual component, for sure, but it comes from the community around us. That is, those members in leadership, those members around us that support even when those hard decisions have to be made. So is there any one source of that nourishment? Of course not. But I would tell you this confluence of a loving, faithful community, it takes a lot of prioritization, but I find that that's really been the biggest source of inspiration for me, even when the times get incredibly difficult in leadership.
That is really difficult, gosh. Well, and one of the models we've used at Christ Church too is we think of a vision of a bonfire. This is something Tim Cole, our Reverend, talks about, where the people closest to the bonfire are the leaders, and we have to keep that fire going because they're all going to take that out to the rest of the parish takes it out into the world. And so we've just started to do monthly dinners with just the leaders of the parish groups to come together for spiritual formation, and that's been an intentional thing we've done. Richard, I wanted to give you the last question because there was something you said in our earlier conversations that really struck with me, if I can just tell
Sure.
it back to you. You said, if our unique Episcopal witness is going to survive, the laity has to step in. And I think that could be, put on a banner for this whole conference. But tell me how you came to that statement, and what do you do, if that is the case, and we want to survive, what do we do to encourage more lay participation?
A couple of thoughts. I think it was said earlier in the introduction that we're becoming more of a lay church supported by clergy. I've had a couple of conversations recently with some bishops and clergy, and what I've learned is that historically our church has been, and our congregations have been, clergy-centric. And I saw that in the transition from our previous rector to our current rector. When I first joined the vestry, I heard the comment was made that there were no disputed discussions in the vestry meeting, that votes weren't contentious at all, which said to me that rector spent a lot of time pulling all of this together so that by the time it got to the vestry meeting, it was a done deal. And now we are encouraging a different model where there is a lot of energy and conversation going on, and not all, there aren't necessarily clear answers to the things that we have to do. And that's going to be what I think we all are going to be, the culture of our churches are going to be moving forward. And the reason I say we've got to encourage that is because I do believe the Episcopal Church matters. I do believe that the Episcopal branch of the Jesus movement matters. And what it means is that these congregations, these parishes, must be healthy and thriving in order to do that. And I'm optimistic, and one of the things that I've heard time and time over these past few days is that we have to both bring that optimism to what we're doing if we want to see this branch continue to thrive. And we've got to open up the possibilities for all of us to bring all of our gifts and talents to bear to make it happen. My initial reaction when I was asked to be senior warden was, "You've got to be kidding." I now recognize, someone asked me the question the other day, I now recognize I was called to that role. And I brought something to the table that made sense. And I think we've got to open ourselves to bring all of ourselves to the table to do God's work. And I think we also have to be vigilant about looking at all of the talents and resources around us and bring them in to move this movement forward.
Well, that's beautifully said. I want to end with a quick rapid fire. If we could just go down and answer as short as you can, just why do you do it with being a lay leader at your church? We'll start with Kelly. Why?
I love Jesus. I can't think of a better way to even try to acknowledge God's love for me. And I love Epiphany, and it's just an incredible way to be a part of an awesome group of God-loving people. So it's all about love.
Wonderful. Lynette?
I'm not a cradle Episcopalian. I grew up in the Baptist church, and my parents were both lay leaders within the Baptist church, so it was a frame of reference I was accustomed to. but I now better understand why they did it. It feeds me too.
Wonderful. Greg, how about you?
I think it comes down to the fact that in my own way, I feel like I make a difference, even if it's in my own household. It doesn't have to be within the whole congregation at St. Thomas, but I think that involvement at St. Thomas has really nurtured this idea. If you just these little things day by day make a big difference, and I prioritize this as part of my life, and so in a myriad of ways, I feel like it does make a difference.
That's wonderful. How about you, Richard?
I feel like I can't be a good person alone. I have to do it. I need a community to challenge me, to stretch me, to support me, and church does that for me.
Well, thank you. Thank you all so much for coming to our wonderful panel.